So we're going to talk a little bit about the bishop wars. That leads us to our next item. Charles I refused to call for Parliament for the next 10 years. Remember I said the king has to call into session Parliament? Well, he decides, okay, you want to do this? No, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to call into session Parliament. I'm going to tax you anyway through my guys, through my sheriffs, my tax collectors, and they start implementing new taxation. Hunting and fishing license, business license, occupational license. Every 5 years, I have to pay $75 to renew my occupational license. When I add my superintendent endorsement next summer, it'll cost me $75 to do that. To go fishing every year, I have to, on January 1st, go down and buy a hunting license and a fishing license. If I wanted to operate a business, I have to go buy not only a state license, but probably a county and a city license. The very things that's a violation of English rights then, we tolerate today. This was such a violation of English rights, it does not end well for the king. So the key thing here is to understand that for 10 years, the king would refuse to call Parliament into session. He needs taxes to operate his government, so he goes and implements new taxation to bypass Parliament. And you could give a couple examples. These are just 3 of many examples. I use these 3 because these are the things that we tolerate today. But the English people they don't tolerate this too terribly long. Notice though, 10 years. They didn't go to war right away. They didn't threaten the king right away. They endured. They tried to negotiate for a long time, much like our founding fathers. It was a good 10 years before the first bullets left the colonial muskets. Actually, I think it was about like 13 years. I would say just understand King Charles did not call Parliament into session for 10 years. He needs taxes to pay for his government. And so remember, who can tax? Who can levy taxes? Parliament. Well, Parliament's not in session. King needs money. So he bypasses Parliament and creates a new taxing mechanism, bypassing Parliament. Now, is this legal? No. No. But he's arguing, wait a minute, Magna Carta doesn't say anything about hunting license or fishing license. After all, it's my animals. Do I not have a right to charge if I'm going to let you? Because in most kingdoms, if you got caught shooting the king's animals, which they were all the king's animals, you could be executed for. So he's allowing a mechanism for people to do that. Remember, who's really doing the hunting? The barons, the dukes, those with the landowners, the ones who have money. You and I, the peasant farmers, we're raising a pig. We don't have the money to go buy a hunting license. And back then, hunting was not for survival. It was a sport. Only gentlemen hunted. It's not like hunting in our country where, especially when our settlers came here, it was all survival then. Not so back then. All right. Parliament, I have a tough time saying this word. Parliamentarians. These are the Protestants on Parliament. They're also called Roundheads. Kind of as a derogatory word for them. You have this group, and then we will tackle the other group. And then you have the second group called the Royalist. They're also known as the Cavaliers. The Royalists are the ones who are supported or who are supporting the king. They were often very fancy dressers. You're going to see the comparison between the two here in just a minute. The Cavaliers was a derogatory term that the Roundheads would use for the Royalist. Later, the Royalists took it as a badge of honor. And today, they're still called Cavaliers, and many of the Cavaliers migrated and established Virginia. Now, the Cavaliers play a huge role in our history when we get there. So just when we talk about the Cavaliers, really pay attention to their culture when we start talking about that, because that's going to play a huge role even still today in the South.
Wait, is that going to be about the rich landowners in the South and then slavery and stuff like that?
A little bit, but that is a byproduct of another issue. The Cavaliers have this strong sense of duty. Strong sense of duty. You'll see that with George Washington. So, simple dress. They're not real fancy. These guys are often would be considered Calvinist, Puritans. Today, we don't really call people Calvinists. They're called Reformed theology. They are very doctrinally straight to what the Bible says. And one of the things is they don't think that it's best use of your money to buy real fancy clothes when it could be used elsewhere. And to be real flashy clothing is not it's drawing too much attention to yourself. And so they often will wear very plain clothing. The old style Quakers will wear black clothing. If you look at Mennonites or Amish, they have a very particular dress, and they don't use bright colors and flashy stuff to draw attention to themselves. And so it's the same thing with this guy. This is an actual painting of somebody of that time period. So we get a pretty good sense of how plain living they are. Okay? On the contrary, we have a Cavalier here. He's quite a dapper guy. He's a real kind of fancy guy. He's got all the fine linens, often silk, very spendy stuff. This is Prince Rupert of the Rhine. He is considered, like I wrote here, he's kind of the poster child of what the Cavaliers looked like back then. They often were the gentleman farmer, meaning they owned the farmland, but other people did the work. Okay? Gives you, and here we have a young man here. There's his sisters. There's his mother. He's being interrogated by a member of parliament here. Where is your dad, boy? We're looking for him, because they want to round him up. They've got a problem with him because he's supporting the king. So a lot of people were executed and put in jail during this time period. So you got the daughter here crying, the boy here standing, probably saying, I don't know where he's at or whatever. So, all right. So, 1640. It kind of comes to a head here. This particular parliament, by the way, they're back in session. It's called the Long Parliament, after an individual who was kind of like the prime minister at the time. They believed that Charles was going to establish Catholicism in England once and for all, and subject England to the dictates of a foreign power. This was considered treason. Now, he was doing just about everything he could to show them that this is in fact what he was going to do. Whether he really was or not, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. But he most certainly was taking all the actions that would indicate he in fact was going to do this. Why what? Well, he is it directly. But see, even when JFK was elected, people were really worried that he was not going to follow the Constitution, but follow what the Pope said. Where's the Pope? Rome. In Rome. That's the foreign power we're referring to. Yeah. So if you have to decide your conscience to the Word of God, i.e., in this case, to the Pope, because he represents Christ and God on earth, or the Constitution or the laws of England, if your conscience is heavier towards theology, in other words, you really believe you have accountability system through Yahweh, God, and by disobeying the Pope, you're disobeying God, then the punishment for that's far worse. You see what I'm saying? So if you're truly Catholic, you're going to follow the Pope, the teachings of the Pope. Whereas if you're going to be secular, you're going to follow the dictates of the law, not what the Pope says. Am I making sense here? Okay. So that was a real concern of when JFK was the first Catholic president, and there was a huge concern for that. That was he really going to represent America, or was he going to represent the Pope? So, he almost didn't get elected because of it. And he almost didn't get the primary. Once he got the primary, then people got behind him because he was, again, young. He was the youngest president at the time to be elected. He was fairly good looking. His wife was gorgeous. They were like the Cinderellas. I mean, they were just classy, they just really changed we were in the middle of a cultural revolution in this country at that time period too. Any other time he probably would have not been elected. But it just so happens, fate being what it is, it was perfect timing for really a catastrophic change in the White House. Well, catastrophic for some, for others, maybe not so much.
He was one of the better presidents, in my opinion, because he was trying to get all the way back to the gold.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, by today's standards, he would have been considered a conservative Republican. Oh yeah. That's how far left both parties have moved. So, he dropped the tax rate like Trump did. At that time, tax rate was 75%. He dropped it to 30 some odd percent. And we had a huge economic boom because of that. And then when President Carter was elected, he did the reverse and dumped us into a major recession where we had interest rates like at 20%. So, that's, when you look at what he did and what he spoke of, you think you're looking at a Republican today. It's really incredible how everything has shifted. And we will talk about it in government class, how our entire political system have shifted to the left towards more dictatorship. What's that? Yep. Yeah, it's constantly changing, but definitely everything's moving to the left. That's why you're seeing more and more of a divide in our political philosophy. Those who stay strong to the Constitution, those individuals called kind of the right wing or the radical right. Well, they're staying to the Constitution. Well, if majority is going to the left further, away from freedom, more government intervention, then they're going to look like they're radicals. But when you read the Constitution, that's how it should be, if we're going to stay to the Constitution. And we're going to discuss the cause and effect and the ramifications from moving from the original intent of our founding fathers to the direction we are currently on now. There is a ramification for that. So, and the thing is, we the people get to make that decision. So, all right. So these were, again, kind of like a civil war between the two groups. We're not going to go into great detail, but I will just tell you that the parliamentarians win. They capture King Charles. There's a trial, and he is beheaded for treason. And he gives a very impassionate speech at the execution block, basically calling out the Protestants, the parliamentarians, for executing their king who God has put on the throne. And the evidence was not that good. Anyways, nonetheless, they took his head off. What's interesting, they sewed his head back on when they put him back in the casket to bury him. Yeah. Don't know why they would sew it on, but they did. They have actually exhumed him, and that's how they found out that there's stitches in all the way around his neck where they sewed him back on. So so for a while there was a constitutional republic established, or a republic that they called a commonwealth established. But a little bit later, about 10 years later, they restored Charles's son, Charles II, to the throne and reminded him, if you don't do what you need to be doing based on what we think, you'll end up like your dad. And the king said, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. So that's, off this slide, understand the king is executed for treason. For 10 years, we have a Commonwealth of England, which is a republic. And then in 1660, Charles II is restored to the throne. Those are the three main points on this slide. Holy cow, we're not going to get it done. We're close. We are very close. Let me know when I can move. We will pick up with the Glorious Revolution and the English Bill of Rights tomorrow. Okay?